So it's a time for our next session, and we've got a great one coming up for you, really interesting as we look at the outlook for thematics this year. And the panel's great because it's so wide-ranging, with property, health and tech portfolio managers joining our moderator, Ignacio De La Maza, who heads up the intermediary business across Europe, the Middle East, Africa and Latin America. Ignacio, great to see you, and I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm really pleased to be the person moderating this panel with the outlook of full thematic in 2022. And today with me, we have three specialists on thematic equity: Jen Nichols, especially on healthcare equity; Denny Fish, portfolio manager for technology equities; and Guy Barnard, who is the co-head of property equities. So thank you so much to the three of you for taking the time. And this especially will provide some answers to some of the questions that we have already received, and we are also really pleased to receive from you in the different systems. So if I may, I will start with Jen. Jen, thank you so much. And we have seen that there is an intersection of technology and healthcare, and with the accelerated level of information taking place, what are the opportunities that you see in medtech in 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ignacio, and thanks everybody for having us here today. I'm really excited to get to talk about healthcare, especially medtech. I think when we think about the innovation for healthcare, we really focus on the therapeutics, and the therapeutics get a lot of attention. However, there's a tremendous amount of innovation taking place on the medtech side of things. I mean, really, thanks to all of the innovation that you see in technology, especially in Denny's sector, has really helped to transform what we see in the healthcare sector as well. As a type 1 diabetic, I was diagnosed almost 20 years ago, and just seeing the change in how we treat diabetes has changed tremendously with the innovation in technology. So thinking back to when I was first diagnosed, really taking 8 to 10 finger pricks a day, not to mention 8 to 10 actual shots a day, to now here I am, I take one shot every 3 days because of the technology that we have. So we've really moved away from kind of this very simplistic way of treating diabetes to, moving to insulin pumps. Then we saw the rise of continuous glucose monitoring systems, which really allows me to monitor my blood sugars on a continual basis rather than a point in time. And now here we are, 2 weeks after the approval of the first tubeless continuous glucose monitoring closed loop system. What does that mean? That means that my Dexcom, my CGM, my continuous glucose monitoring system now will talk to my insulin pump. And so instead of having to make a lot of decisions about what to do with my insulin needs, my Dexcom will work with my insulin pump to monitor those blood sugar levels and give me the proper amount of insulin. Not only does this provide me greater control of my numbers, but also eases the burden that it takes to actually manage diabetes on a daily basis. So what we've seen in technology has really helped to improve the technology and how we treat patients in the diabetes market.
So definitely, thank you so much, Jen. We see a lot of evolution there on that part. And I think that to Denny on that topic, on the innovation and technology, the pandemic has accelerated some of the most powerful secular themes, driven the entire market, many of them digitally oriented. So did we just accelerated the next industrial revolution? What are your thoughts there? What are the most prominent themes that you will see? Maybe it's too strong, those comments, but it's quite interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because we've had a working thesis that for the last 20 years, we've been in the early phases of the evolution of the fourth industrial revolution built on a knowledge-based economy. And that has pretty significant implications over the next 20 to 30 years. And what the pandemic did was it just highlighted and created a forcing function for the adoption and the evolution of technologies, both across enterprises and consumers. And that led to faster than expected adoption, of course.
So we might have
an enterprise.
So yes.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, the evolution of cloud-based technologies, the implementation and the adoption of artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as collaboration and connected anywhere, anytime. And then lastly, I think what's really important is that the pandemic has also highlighted the importance of technology on the physical economy, as we've seen based on supply chain shortages and the importance to semiconductor content globally across every industry. So yes, to your question, I think we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, and the themes are more powerful today than they were even 2 years ago.
So I think that links us to really the reality also that we experience, and this goes to Guy. If we are interacting with friends, with family, with colleagues more remotely, that has changed not only how people live, but also where do they live and work. So do you have those some of your thoughts on that front?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'd echo a lot of Denny's points that technology has really enabled us to work, to live, to shop and consume goods and services in a different way. But the pandemic was really the catalyst to bring that to the fore. And I think what we've got to try and do now as investors is to try and understand which of those changes were forced upon us and are maybe more transitory in nature, and which are the changes driven by these longer term structural trends that are going to become more embedded. So as it comes to the question as to sort of where we will live going forwards, I think there was definitely a transitory element over the last few years that saw a lot of people leaving some of the big gateway cities. They moved out because they wanted more space, because a younger generation could live with their parents again and save some money. And that had a pretty big impact on rents in cities like New York and London. But what's quite interesting is that in the last 6 to 12 months, those people have come back. So people are coming back into the city, younger generations. They want to experience the cultural elements of cities. They want to see their friends. They want to go to bars and nightclubs. And we can talk about the metaverse, but that's something that you can't do in the metaverse, certainly to my knowledge. So I think that was a transitory change, but there are undoubtedly longer term structural changes. You've got older millennials having kids, typically renting rather than owning, and they're now looking for more space and moving into single family houses in the suburbs. You've got baby boomers retiring and moving down to the Sun Belt in the US for a better quality of life. So there are clearly going to be winners and losers. And I think another sort of point I would just make on that residential piece is understanding the winning and losing cities, because what is also very clear is that in the US, cities like Austin and Denver are winning at the expense of cities like New York and San Francisco. So I think there are changes going on under the hood. It doesn't mean that all cities are dead. But I think you're just going to have to be more selective when you think about, where are the winning cities, the winning types of properties going to be as we move forward.
I think that, Guy, in that topic that you're saying, some winners and losers, this might go to Denny, which is basically, to a certain extent, every company is now a tech company. But it would be great to hear from you, Denny, how some of the best company in every sector is leveraging technology to improve their business model.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are, two or three really important elements to that. One is the adoption of modern technologies to create more agile and flexible enterprises. Super important, whether you're consumer or enterprise. Secondly, the use of data and telemetry to actually improve business processes, but also create new revenue streams. I think one of the most important things that we've seen from technology, it's allowing companies both in the digital and the physical economy to create things like subscription revenue streams because of the ability to connect everything that they sell, and whether that's semiconductor capital equipment, automobiles, industrial equipment, all of these companies are actually creating new and unique ways to stay connected with their customers and create new revenue streams. And then I would say the last way is actually leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to create new and unique offerings for customers. And so a really good example is agriculture, for example. And we wouldn't think of that as a cutting edge industry, but we're seeing a ton of innovation as we integrate things like weather and soil data and all other different types of information to get more precise, that's leading to much higher yields and much more opportunity in terms of addressing one of our global needs, and that is food. And it's really important, and a really good example of how an old school industry is leveraging new age technologies to really improve efficiency.
Well, thank you so much, Denny, for that. It's pretty clear that this conference is also being done virtually, which is something that probably in the past it was not even thought of, and is clearly we're implementing technology on that front. So if I can move now to the stock market, and this might go to Jen on the healthcare stock performance, and we have seen that not all the subsectors in the healthcare has performed the same way. So how did COVID-19 influence returns on healthcare stock, and what can you anticipate the move that this may be moving to an endemic instead of being a pandemic could basically influence the healthcare sector and the different stocks?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot in there, especially when we think about going back to 2020, which now seems like ages ago. When you look at the healthcare sector, it's definitely a great year in 2020 and 2021, up 13%, 19% respectively, which on an absolute basis is a pretty solid return. Still lags the broader equity indices, but still great return. One of my favorite quotes from the pandemic has been, we're all in the same storm, but we all have different boats. And I kind of feel like the same thing really applies to healthcare. And you think about the different subsectors within healthcare, and whether that's pharmaceuticals, biotech. And like when I think about biotech, think more small and mid-cap biotech, not so much the large cap area of biotech. And then you kind of have med tech in the devices and the services areas. And all perform pretty differently during the pandemic. And even as we've come out of that, maybe if I start with pharmaceuticals, I would say that's a little bit more idiosyncratic. When you think about those business models, they tend to be very large, diverse, have a lot of revenues from diversity of therapeutics that are already in market, not a lot of risk of bringing new drugs to the market. And you didn't see so much negative COVID impact. But as you go into areas such as medtech, even looking at that subsector, it wasn't created equal. So as we were coming into the pandemic, areas of medtech that typically are not really cyclical. So think of, those companies that are providing the necessary equipment for heart surgeries. Heart surgeries were really considered elective during the pandemic. And so you saw a decline in medical procedures over 85%. So you saw some areas of medtech that really had their demand delayed until we were kind of moving out of this pandemic. But then you had areas such as diabetes that I was talking about earlier that were tremendous beneficiaries during COVID, because people such as myself, you still need all your diabetes equipment during a pandemic. So you didn't really see the decline in demand for a lot of those med tech companies, and they really flourished during the market. And then you had biotech. So if I think about small and mid-cap biotech, it was a little bumpy as we were coming into the pandemic, little concerns about the asset class. But really, as the market bottomed in March of 2020, you really saw small and mid-cap have probably one of the best years that you've ever seen. Tremendous amount of IPOs coming to market, a lot of innovation in the space, a lot of excitement around innovation in small and mid-cap biotech. However, 2021 really brought a different market environment, especially for small and mid-cap biotech. And we're kind of in the worst bear market that we've seen in this space, which has been absolutely incredible. When you think about the fundamentals are still really intact. MedTech has had a little bit of volatility. You've seen some of the comeback in the demand for their products, although now we're seeing, the issues from a labor side of things, especially in nursing. You're seeing the labor shortage in nursing really impact some of the MedTech names as well, especially those that are related to surgery. And I would say, even thinking away from the pandemic, some of the concerns right now that are really affecting the market are, what is the Fed going to do? Where are rates going to move? And really this rotation away from higher multiple growth stocks and really into the more defensive areas. So you're seeing kind of a shift within healthcare and what investors are really preferring. And you're really seeing those more defensive or traditionally defensive areas of healthcare really hold up, such as the pharmaceutical companies, while the more innovative, maybe more risk associated with them on the biotech side of things, still being out of favor for investors.
So clearly there is plenty of opportunities there, and that is one of the advantages of being active in that sense. But I think that there is some concerns, and we know this, and this question maybe is going straight to Guy, and is inflation still remain a concern for investors? So it would be great to see, but historically, property has stand well in an environment like this one. But we would love to hear from you as a specialist. What is the opportunities that you find in an environment like this one, which brings some concern for some of our clients?
Yeah, look, I think this time 12 months ago, we were talking about sort of transitory inflation, and clearly that narrative has moved on, and it looks like it is going to persist, even at a decreasing rate, just because of base effects, still a higher level of inflation in the second half of this year. And I think what we've seen certainly over time historically is that real estate as a real asset, finite amount of land, raw materials and labor going into constructing it, has served well during inflationary periods. And we actually did some work in-house with our portfolio construction services team, just looking back a relatively short period, but looking back over the last 20 years and breaking down the market backdrop into periods of inflation and different levels of growth. And the output of that was that in a period where there is a higher level of inflation, and by that they mean greater than 2%, and economic growth, then real estate, and listed real estate in particular, tends to perform pretty well, outperforming equities, bonds and commodities against that backdrop. So, history may not repeat, but we do think it will certainly rhyme. In terms of sort of why that is, we talk a lot about our landlords, the listed real estate landlords being the landlords to the global economy. So as we've got economies recovering, as we've got growth and inflation, as a result of that, then typically our landlords will benefit from rising rents because there is more demand for their space. And often that is an implicit link in a rental contract as well, that inflation will feed through into rental growth. But I think you've got to be careful, because you can have a rental contract that goes up every year because of an inflation index. If at the end of that rental contract, your tenant doesn't want to be there because you're in a weak retail location or an office that isn't meeting the new requirements in terms of environmental standards, then that is a sort of false inflation protection, because you're going to lose a lot of value at the end of it. So for us, it always comes down to pricing power, focus on those areas of the market with structural growth, try and play some of the cyclical recoveries, hotels, self-storage, residential to some extent, where we can pass that inflation through very quickly because of shorter term rental contracts. But again, be selective. I think it is those alternative structurally supported areas of the market where you get true pricing power and real inflation protection.
Well, thank you so much, Guy, for that. And we keep receiving questions from the audience here. And it's maybe a final one for Denny, which is basically, I'm reading here. We used to say that the digital is eating the world, but now the world seems to have silently become digital. So what is the metaverse, and how is changing the way we interact with the world? So all to you, Denny.
Yeah. No,
in 1 minute, I think that's harsh, actually.
Maybe Denny went to the metaverse, but I think that we have some technical issues there.
Yeah, so I think Ignacio, that may have been a hard one for everyone to answer in a minute. I think they're all a bit stunned by the challenge. It's presented.
Yeah, well, if you can hear me, what I was trying to say is that the metaverse is the way to think about the metaverse is the natural extension of the existing internet. And what that means is it's extrapolating forward to an environment where people are entirely immersed and in a persistent environment. And that doesn't mean that there's one big metaverse, but there will be many, many metaverses of communities that develop that allow for unique collaboration, whether it's among consumers or whether it's among enterprises. And it is a much longer conversation. We actually have a video coming out on this for anyone who's interested any day now, but kind of think about it as the next iteration of the internet. But as we always say, we always overestimate what we can do in a year and we underestimate what we can do in a decade. And we're kind of in that phase of the metaverse right now.
Thank you so much, Denny. I'm looking forward to the video. With that, thank you so much to the three of you for your answer on this topic. And I will hand this now to Lucy. Thank you so much.
Denny, in my business, that's called a great soundbite, managing to answer that in 30 seconds. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ignacio. Guy, good to see you. And Jennifer as well. Jen, it's always great to hear your personal story too about how tech's revolutionized your diabetes treatment. Thanks for sharing that with us. Thanks so much, everyone.